Marcus arrived at Cafe Meridian 15 minutes early, choosing a corner table that offered a clear view of both the entrance and the street outside. Professional habits died hard, even during off-duty social meetings. The cafe's warm lighting and comfortable furniture created an intimate atmosphere perfect for serious conversation, while the steady background hum of other customers provided privacy for sensitive topics. Emma appeared in the doorway precisely at 7, scanning the room until she spotted Marcus waving from his corner table. She wore a simple blue dress instead of traveling clothes, and her auburn hair hung loose around her shoulders rather than pulled back in a practical ponytail. The transformation made her look younger and more vulnerable, but also more beautiful than Marcus had realized. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Emma admitted as she settled into the chair across from him. "After I got home last night, I wondered if I'd shared too much with a complete stranger." "We're not complete strangers," Marcus replied, signaling the waitress for service. "We're two people who both care about the palace, just from different perspectives." Emma ordered tea while Marcus chose coffee, and they spent a few minutes exchanging basic information about their current lives. Emma worked as a librarian at the city's main branch, specializing in historical archives and research assistance. Marcus had lived in the same apartment for 8 years, enjoyed reading mystery novels during his free time, and had never married despite several long-term relationships that hadn't survived the demands of his security career. "Being a palace guard sounds exciting," Emma observed. "But I imagine it's difficult to maintain personal relationships when your work involves so much secrecy and irregular hours." "It has its challenges," Marcus acknowledged. "Most people don't understand that 90% of security work is routine observation and preparation. They expect constant drama and intrigue. But there must be some dramatic moments," Emma pressed. "State dinners, royal ceremonies, visiting dignitaries with complicated security requirements." Marcus smiled at her genuine curiosity. "Those events are actually the easiest part of the job because everyone follows strict protocols. The challenging situations involve unexpected problems, medical emergencies, equipment failures, weather complications that force last-minute changes to carefully planned events." Their conversation was interrupted when the waitress brought their drinks and asked if they wanted to order food. Both declined, preferring to keep the meeting casual rather than committing to a full dinner together. "Tell me about your father's work," Marcus said once they were alone again. "You mentioned special projects that required discretion. Did he ever talk about specific assignments or responsibilities?" Emma wrapped her hands around her teacup, using the warmth to steady herself before answering. "He was always very careful about what he shared at home. Professional ethics, he called it. But sometimes he would mention people he worked with, places he traveled, problems he was trying to solve." "What kind of problems?" Marcus asked gently. "Complicated situations involving the royal family's relationships with other kingdoms. Trade disputes, diplomatic tensions, accusations of impropriety that needed careful investigation and response." Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. "He used to say that his job was to solve problems before they became scandals." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. Emma's description matched the responsibilities of palace intelligence operatives, highly classified positions that involve protecting royal family members from various forms of threat or embarrassment. Such work required absolute discretion and often involved activities that couldn't be documented through normal administrative channels. "Emma," Marcus said slowly, "I think your father might have worked in palace security rather than general administrative services." She looked up from her tea, meeting his eyes directly. "Why would you think that?" "Because the problems you're describing, diplomatic tensions, potential scandals, sensitive investigations, those fall under security jurisdiction. Administrative services handle scheduling, correspondence, financial management, things like that." Emma was quiet for several minutes, and Marcus sensed an internal struggle about how much truth to reveal. "My father never told me exactly what his title was," she admitted finally. "I was young, and he always said the specifics of his work weren't appropriate for family conversation. But I knew it was important. I knew people depended on him to handle situations that could affect the royal family's reputation." "Did he work directly with the royal family members?" Marcus asked. "Or primarily with other staff?" "Both," Emma replied. "He traveled with them sometimes, especially on official visits to other kingdoms. and he spent a lot of time in meetings with palace administrators, planning responses to various situations. The picture emerging from Emma's memories suggested her father had held a senior position in palace intelligence operations. Such roles provided access to highly classified information and required personal relationships with royal family members based on absolute trust and loyalty. "Emma, I need to ask you something directly," Marcus said. "Did your father ever mention specific members of the royal family by name in casual conversation at home?" Emma hesitated, then nodded slowly. "He talked about King Leopold sometimes, about how much pressure the king faced making decisions that affected the entire kingdom. And he mentioned Princess Elena when she was younger. He was concerned about her safety during public appearances." Marcus felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Princess Elena was currently 26 years old. If Emma's father had been concerned about her safety when she was younger, it suggested his palace employment had continued until relatively recently, possibly right up until his death 12 years earlier. "How old are you?" Marcus asked, though he immediately regretted the personal question. 28. Emma replied without offense. "Why?" Marcus calculated quickly in his head. If Emma was 28 now and her father had died when she was 12, that meant his death had occurred 16 years ago, not 12 as Emma had stated. Either she had misspoken about the timing, or there were details about her father's death that she hadn't shared accurately. "I thought you said your father died when you were 12, Marcus said carefully. "But if you're 28 now, 16 years ago," Emma corrected herself quickly. "I said 12 because that's how old I was. Sometimes I mix up the time frames when I'm talking about it." Marcus accepted the explanation, though something in Emma's tone suggested the correction hadn't been entirely honest. 16 years ago would have been during a particularly challenging period for the royal family. There were several diplomatic crises, some internal political tensions, and concerns about security threats from various sources. Emma's expression became guarded. "What kind of security threats?" "Nothing that affected public safety," Marcus assured her quickly. "But there were some situations involving foreign intelligence operations, attempts to gather information about the royal family's personal lives, efforts to identify and exploit potential vulnerabilities." "Did anyone ever try to hurt people who work for the royal family?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The question sent an immediate alarm through Marcus's security-trained instincts. "Emma, is there something specific you're worried about? Something you think might have happened to your father?" Emma stared into her teacup, tears threatening again. "The car accident that killed him," she said finally. "The police said it was just bad weather, icy roads, an unfortunate tragedy. But there were some things about it that never made sense to my mother and me." Marcus leaned forward, his attention completely focused on Emma's words. "What kind of things?" "He was an excellent driver, very careful, especially in winter conditions. He knew those roads perfectly because he drove them every day. And the accident happened on a straight stretch of highway where visibility was clear." Emma paused, wiping away tears. "The police said he must have fallen asleep at the wheel, but he had just left work. He should have been alert." "Did your family request a detailed investigation?" Marcus asked. "My mother tried, but we didn't have any influence or connections after my father died. The police said their investigation was thorough and concluded it was an accident. The case was closed within 2 weeks." Marcus felt a growing sense that Emma's story involved more than a chance encounter between a guard and a tourist. If her father had been involved in palace intelligence work and had died under questionable circumstances, there might be security implications that went far beyond personal tragedy. "Emma, I want to help you find answers about your father's death," Marcus said. "But I need to ask you to be completely honest with me about everything you know or suspect. Can you do that?" Emma looked directly into his eyes, and Marcus saw fear mixed with hope in her expression. "There's more," she admitted. "Things I've never told anyone because I wasn't sure they were important." "Tell me everything," Marcus encouraged. "The week before my father died, he seemed worried about something. He made phone calls at home, which he never did because of security protocols. He asked my mother to pack emergency bags for both of us and keep them in the hall closet. And he gave me a small key, telling me to keep it safe and never tell anyone about it." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Do you still have the key?" Emma nodded, reaching into her purse to withdraw a small brass key attached to a thin chain. I've carried it with me for 16 years, but I've never known what it opens. Marcus examined the key without touching it. The design was distinctive, clearly custom-made rather than mass-produced. Have you ever tried to find out what it opens? I was afraid to, Emma confessed. After my father died, men came to our house asking questions about his work, going through his personal belongings, taking away boxes of papers and documents. My mother was too grief-stricken to ask many questions, but I was scared. They seemed more interested in finding something specific than offering condolences. What kind of men? Marcus asked. Police? Palace officials? They said they were from the palace, conducting routine procedures after the death of an employee. But they wore plain clothes, asked strange questions, and seemed disappointed when they couldn't find whatever they were looking for. Marcus felt the situation taking on darker implications. Standard palace procedures following an employee's death involved retrieving classified materials and conducting security assessments, but such activities typically involved uniformed personnel following established protocols. Emma, I think you need to speak with someone in authority about your father's death and these subsequent events, Marcus said seriously. There may be security issues that were never properly investigated. Who would I talk to? Emma asked. And what if they don't believe me? What if they think I'm just a grieving daughter inventing conspiracies to avoid accepting that my father's death was a random accident? Marcus considered her concerns carefully. Palace security protocols required reporting any information that might affect royal family safety, but Emma's story involved events from 16 years earlier. Chain of command demanded that he discuss the situation with his immediate supervisor before taking any independent action. I have a contact in palace administration who handles historical security matters, Marcus said. Someone who would know about your father's employment and could access records from that time period. Would you be willing to speak with him? Emma gripped the key more tightly. What would happen to me if I talked to palace officials? Would I be in any danger? Not from the palace, Marcus assured her. But if your father was killed because of his work, and if someone thought he had information or materials that could still be dangerous, then, yes, there might be risks involved in pursuing this investigation. Emma was quiet for several minutes, weighing the potential consequences of finally sharing her long-held suspicions. I've spent 16 years wondering about the truth, she said finally. I think I'd rather face whatever risks are involved than continue living with questions that might never be answered otherwise. Marcus reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. I'll make the initial contact and arrange a meeting. But, Emma, once we start this process, there's no going back. Are you absolutely certain this is what you want to do? Emma squeezed his hand in return, and Marcus felt the strength beneath her apparent vulnerability. My father believed in serving something larger than himself. If his death was connected to that service, then I owe it to his memory to find the truth. As they left the cafe together, Marcus found himself hoping that Emma's search for answers wouldn't lead her into dangers she couldn't imagine. But he also knew that some truths were worth pursuing regardless of the risks, and that sometimes the most important discoveries began with the courage to ask difficult questions about events everyone else preferred to leave undisturbed. The key Emma carried might unlock more than just a physical object. It might open doors to secrets that had been buried for 16 years, waiting for someone with enough determination to dig them up and examine them in the light. 3 days later, Marcus found himself thinking about Emma during his evening patrol of the palace grounds. The encounter in the library had left him with questions that professional protocol prevented him from pursuing. Palace guards maintained strict boundaries with visitors, polite assistance when needed, but no personal relationships or ongoing contact. Yet something about Emma's emotional reaction to the palace continued to puzzle him. The evening shift offered different challenges than daytime tourist security. Fewer people meant greater focus on perimeter protection, monitoring entry points, and coordinating with the royal family's personal protection detail. Marcus walked familiar paths through gardens where moonlight cast silver patterns across fountains and sculpture displays. The palace looked different at night, more mysterious, more romantic, but also more vulnerable to potential security threats. His radio crackled softly with routine check-ins from other guards stationed around the complex. Tower post, all clear. East gate, no activity. Motor pool, vehicles secure. The steady rhythm of security communications provided reassurance that all systems functioned normally. As Marcus rounded the corner near the rose garden, he noticed a figure sitting alone on one of the public benches just outside the palace gates. Even from a distance, something about the person's posture seemed familiar. Moving closer while maintaining professional alertness, he recognized the auburn hair and traveling clothes he had seen 3 days earlier. Emma sat perfectly still on the bench, staring up at the palace's illuminated windows. She held no camera this time, no notebook for recording observations. Just a young woman gazing at a building that clearly held deep personal significance for her. Marcus faced a professional dilemma. The bench sat on public property, outside palace security jurisdiction, so Emma wasn't violating any regulations. Yet her repeated presence near the palace raised questions about her intentions and possible security implications. More importantly, her obvious emotional distress during their previous encounter suggested someone who might need help. After a moment of consideration, Marcus approached the bench. "Emma, is that right?" She turned, recognizing him immediately. "The guard from the library. I remember you." Her voice carried none of the tears from their previous meeting, but sadness remained in her expression. "Marcus," he introduced himself, stepping closer but maintaining respectful distance. "Marcus Thorne. I've been working palace security for 15 years. Emma nodded acknowledgement, but didn't invite further conversation. Instead, she returned her attention to the palace windows, several of which glowed warmly in the darkness. "Do you come here often?" Marcus asked, settling carefully on the opposite end of the bench. "I mean, besides the tour the other day." "Sometimes," Emma replied after a long pause. "When I need to think. When I need to remember." Marcus waited for her to elaborate, but she seemed content with silence. Years of security work had taught him the value of patience, especially when dealing with people who carried emotional burdens. Rushing conversations often closed doors that might otherwise open naturally. "It's a beautiful building," Marcus offered eventually, "especially at night. The architects designed those tower lights to be visible from across the valley." "My father used to say the same thing," Emma said quietly. "About the lights. He said they were like beacons, guiding people home." The mention of her father opened a small window into Emma's story, but Marcus sensed the need to proceed carefully. Personal information shared during chance encounters often revealed more than people intended. "Did your family live nearby?" Marcus asked. "When you were young?" Emma turned to look at him directly for the first time since he had joined her on the bench. Her green eyes reflected the palace lights, and Marcus noticed something he had missed during their previous meeting. A small scar along her left temple, barely visible unless viewed from exactly the right angle. "Closer than you might think," she answered cryptically. "But that was a long time ago. Different circumstances. Different life entirely." Marcus found himself genuinely curious about Emma's background, though professional training warned against becoming too personally involved with anyone who showed unusual interest in the palace. Security protocols existed for good reasons, and emotions could compromise judgment in dangerous ways. "The tour guide mentioned that you seemed particularly interested in Queen Isabella's portrait," Marcus said, choosing a neutral topic that might encourage Emma to share more without feeling pressured. "She was remarkable," Emma replied, her voice gaining strength. "Most people remember her for the trade expansion and economic growth, but she also established the first schools for common children. She believed education should be available to everyone, not just nobility." Marcus was impressed by Emma's knowledge of royal history. Most tourists absorbed basic facts during palace tours, but Emma spoke about Queen Isabella with the familiarity of someone who had studied her reign extensively. "Are you a history teacher?" Marcus asked. "Or maybe a student working on research?" Emma smiled for the first time since he had known her, though the expression carried more sadness than joy. "Neither really. I just grew up with stories about the royal family. Family stories that went beyond what you'd find in history books." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the palace gates. Marcus immediately stood and activated his radio, following security protocols that required all guards to coordinate during any unexpected arrivals. Emma remained seated, but Marcus noticed she was watching the scene with more interest than a typical tourist would show. Two black sedans pulled through the security checkpoint, their diplomatic flags identifying them as representatives from the neighboring kingdom of Aldrich. Palace lights illuminated the formal procession as the vehicles moved toward the main entrance, where other guards were already taking positions to receive the unexpected guests. Late-night diplomatic visit. Marcus explained to Emma, though he wondered why he felt compelled to share even basic operational information with someone who was essentially a stranger. The Aldrich delegation, Emma observed. They're probably here about the trade agreement renewal. It expires next month, and there have been some complications with the shipping routes. Marcus stared at her in surprise. The trade agreement details were not public information, certainly not something a casual palace tourist would know. Even most palace staff remained unaware of specific diplomatic negotiations unless their duties required such knowledge. "How do you know about the trade agreement?" Marcus asked, his voice taking on a more official tone despite their friendly conversation. Emma seemed to realize she had revealed more than intended. She stood up from the bench, gathering her jacket around her shoulders as if preparing to leave. "I should go? I didn't mean to keep you from your duties." "Emma, wait," Marcus said, stepping closer. "I'm not questioning you officially. I'm just curious. You clearly know things about palace operations that most people wouldn't." She paused, looking back at the palace one more time before meeting his eyes. "My father worked here," she said simply. "Before I was born. Before everything changed." "What kind of work?" Marcus pressed gently. "Important work. Work that mattered to the royal family." Emma's voice carried a note of pride mixed with old grief. "He used to tell me stories about life inside the palace, about the people who lived there, about how much they cared about the kingdom and its citizens." Marcus felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to align, though the complete picture remained unclear. "Is your father still alive? Does he still work for the royal family?" Emma shook her head, tears threatening again. "He died when I was 12. Car accident during a winter storm. After that, everything changed. The story stopped. The connections disappeared. I became just another citizen with memories of a life that used to matter." The pain in Emma's voice touched something in Marcus that had nothing to do with professional security concerns. Here was someone who had lost not just a father, but an entire identity connected to the palace and royal family. Her emotional reaction during the tour made perfect sense now. She wasn't just viewing historical artifacts. She was revisiting a childhood where these places had been part of her daily reality. "I'm sorry about your father," Marcus said sincerely. "Losing a parent that young must have been devastating." "Thank you," Emma replied, wiping away tears that had started despite her efforts to control them. "He was a good man, dedicated to his work and loyal to the royal family. He used to say that serving the crown wasn't just a job, it was a calling." The diplomatic vehicles had completed their arrival process, and Marcus could see guards resuming normal positions around the palace perimeter. His radio remained quiet, indicating that the unexpected visit posed no security concerns. "What was your father's name?" Marcus asked. Maybe some of the older staff members would remember him. Emma hesitated again, as if sharing her father's name would make their conversation too real, too significant to dismiss as a chance encounter between a guard and a tourist. "James," she said finally. "James Morrison. He worked in administrative services." Marcus searched his memory for any mention of James Morrison, but 15 years of palace employment hadn't included much interaction with historical staff records. The administrative services department encompassed many different roles, from financial management to protocol coordination to liaison work with other governmental agencies. "Administrative services covers a lot of different positions," Marcus observed. "Do you know specifically what your father did?" "He managed special projects," Emma replied vaguely. "Things that required discretion and attention to detail. He traveled sometimes, representing the royal family's interests in various matters." The description suggested work that went beyond typical administrative duties, possibly involving sensitive diplomatic or financial responsibilities. Such positions required high-level security clearances and direct access to royal family members, exactly the kind of background that would give a young girl intimate knowledge of palace operations. "Emma," Marcus said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me asking, but why did you take the public tour? If your father worked here, surely you visited the palace as a child. You would have seen much more than any tourist ever could." Emma sat back down on the bench, her emotional energy seemingly depleted by the conversation. "Because I wanted to see if it felt the same," she admitted. "I wanted to know if the magic I remembered was real, or if it was just a child's fantasy about a life that was probably never as special as I thought." Marcus joined her on the bench again, maintaining respectful distance while offering his presence as support. "And how did it feel during the tour?" "Like coming home to a place that doesn't know you anymore," Emma said softly. "Everything was beautiful and familiar, but I was just another face in the crowd. Just another tourist taking pictures and asking questions about things that used to be part of my everyday world." The sadness in Emma's voice stirred something protective in Marcus, a desire to help that went beyond professional duty. Security guards dealt with many different types of people: threats to be neutralized, visitors to be assisted, colleagues to be supported. But Emma represented something new in his experience, someone whose connection to the palace paralleled his own, but from a completely different perspective. "The palace is still here," Marcus pointed out gently. "The royal family still cares about the kingdom and its citizens, just like your father said. Maybe the connections aren't gone. Maybe they just look different now." Emma turned to study his face in the moonlight. "Do you really believe that? After 15 years of watching tourists come and go, do you still think this place matters the way it used to?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "I think it matters differently," he said finally. "The world has changed since your father worked here. The royal family's role has evolved, but the core purpose remains the same: serving the people, preserving traditions, providing stability and continuity. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my father had lived," Emma mused. "Whether I would have grown up inside this world instead of looking at it from outside. Whether I would have understood my place in it." "Maybe that's something you can still discover," Marcus suggested. "Your father's service created a legacy that doesn't disappear just because circumstances changed." Emma was quiet for several minutes, absorbing his words while watching the palace windows. Some lights had been extinguished as evening progressed, but others remained bright, suggesting ongoing activity within the royal residence. "Thank you for sitting with me," Emma said eventually. "I know this isn't part of your job description." Marcus smiled. "Actually, community relations is part of security work, making sure people feel safe and welcome around the palace. Though I admit our conversation has gone beyond typical protocol. I should let you get back to your patrol," Emma said, standing once more. "I don't want to cause any problems for you with your supervisors." "Emma," Marcus called as she prepared to leave. "Would you like to meet again sometime? Maybe for coffee? I'd like to hear more about your father's work, if you're comfortable sharing." She looked surprised by the invitation, as if she hadn't expected their chance encounter to develop into anything more significant. "Are you allowed to socialize with people you meet through work?" "There are guidelines about fraternization with palace staff and official visitors," Marcus replied. "But you're a private citizen who happened to take a public tour. As long as we're both comfortable with appropriate boundaries, I don't see any policy issues." Emma considered his offer while studying his face for signs of ulterior motives. "Just coffee and conversation?" "Just coffee and conversation," Marcus confirmed. "No pressure, no expectations. Just two people sharing stories about a place that means something to both of them." "All right," Emma agreed, though uncertainty remained in her voice. "There's a cafe called Meridian about 6 blocks from here. Do you know it?" Marcus nodded. "I know Meridian. Good coffee, quiet atmosphere. What time works for you?" "Tomorrow evening? Around 7? I work during the day, but evenings are usually free." "Tomorrow at 7 works perfectly," Marcus confirmed. "I'll see you at Meridian." Emma walked away into the darkness, leaving Marcus alone with questions about why he had extended the invitation and what he hoped to accomplish by learning more about James Morrison and his daughter's connection to the palace. His radio crackled with the voice of his supervisor. "Marcus, security sweep complete. Diplomatic visit concluded without incident. Resume normal patrol pattern." "Acknowledged," Marcus replied, returning his attention to professional duties while his mind continued processing the evening's unexpected encounter with someone whose story seemed far from finished. The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Raven's Hollow Palace as Marcus Thorne adjusted his ceremonial uniform for the 100th time. The golden buttons gleamed against the deep blue fabric, each thread perfectly aligned according to royal protocol. After 15 years serving as a palace guard, these preparations had become second nature, yet today felt different somehow. Marcus stood at attention beside the main entrance, his practiced eyes scanning the growing crowd of tourists gathering for the morning palace tour. The tourists came from everywhere, wealthy families from distant kingdoms, curious travelers with weathered backpacks, and elderly couples clutching guidebooks written in languages he couldn't identify. Each visitor underwent the same security procedures, the same careful inspection of belongings, the same polite but firm instructions about photography restrictions and proper behavior within the royal residence. The palace itself was a masterpiece of architecture, its white marble walls rising majestically toward towers that pierced the morning sky. Intricate carvings decorated every surface, telling stories of ancient battles, royal weddings, and diplomatic triumphs that had shaped the kingdom's history. Golden spires caught the sunlight, casting dancing reflections across the manicured gardens where peacocks strutted between perfectly trimmed hedges. Among the gathering crowd, one figure caught Marcus's attention. A young woman with auburn hair tied back in a simple ponytail stood slightly apart from the other tourists, her camera hanging and used around her neck. While others chatted excitedly or posed for selfies against the palace backdrop, she remained still, her green eyes studying the building with an intensity that seemed almost reverent. She wore practical traveling clothes, comfortable walking shoes, dark jeans, and a light jacket that had seen better days. Nothing about her appearance suggested wealth or status, yet something in her posture commanded attention. She held herself with quiet confidence, her gaze moving methodically across architectural details that most visitors ignored in favor of more obvious attractions. Marcus found himself studying her face when she wasn't looking. There was intelligence in her expression, curiosity tempered with respect. Unlike many tourists who seemed to view the palace as merely another photo opportunity, this woman appeared genuinely interested in understanding what she was seeing. The tour guide, a cheerful woman named Catherine who had been conducting palace tours for nearly 2 decades, called for attention. Her voice carried easily across the courtyard as she welcomed the group and began the standard introduction about palace history and safety regulations. The tourists gathered around her, cameras ready, notebooks open, children fidgeting with excitement. Welcome to Raven's Hollow Palace, the official residence of the royal family for over 4 centuries, Catherine announced with practiced enthusiasm. Before we begin our journey through these historic halls, please remember that photography is permitted in designated areas only. Flash photography is strictly prohibited throughout the palace, and please maintain appropriate noise levels as this is still a working royal residence. Marcus noticed the auburn-haired woman listening intently, but her eyes kept drifting toward the guards stationed at various points around the courtyard. She seemed to be studying their positions, their equipment, their procedures with the same careful attention she had given the architecture. Most tourists barely acknowledged the guards' presence, treating them as part of the scenery rather than actual people. The tour group moved toward the main entrance, passing through security checkpoints where bags were inspected and metal detectors beeped softly. Marcus maintained his position, acknowledging colleagues with subtle nods while keeping watch for any signs of trouble. Years of training had taught him to recognize potential threats, suspicious behavior, inappropriate clothing for the weather that might conceal weapons, nervous gestures that could indicate criminal intent. Nothing about the morning tour group raised any immediate concerns. The families seemed genuinely excited about their visit. Elderly couples moved slowly but safely, and even the teenagers appeared more interested in the palace's grandeur than causing mischief. Yet Marcus found his attention returning repeatedly to the woman with the auburn hair. As the group entered the palace's main hall, Catherine's voice echoed off marble columns that stretched toward an ornately painted ceiling. The Great Hall was completed in 1847 under King Leopold III, who wanted to create a space worthy of hosting international dignitaries and state functions. The ceiling frescoes depict scenes from our kingdom's founding mythology, while the marble was quarried from the northern mountains specifically for this construction. The woman with the camera had positioned herself at the back of the group, but Marcus could see her taking notes in a small leather journal. Her handwriting appeared neat and precise, suggesting education and attention to detail. She photographed architectural elements rather than posing for tourist shots, focusing on doorway carvings, window designs, and decorative metalwork that most visitors overlooked. Through the large windows, Marcus could see other guard units conducting their regular patrols of the palace grounds. The royal family was currently in residence, though their private quarters remained completely off-limits to tours. Security protocols required heightened vigilance whenever tourists moved through the public areas of an occupied royal residence. The tour continued through the state dining room, where a massive table could seat 60 guests for formal occasions. Crystal chandeliers hung from an elaborate ceiling, while oil paintings of former monarchs gazed down from gilded frames. Catherine explained the room's history while tourists marveled at the opulent furnishings and tried to imagine what royal dinner parties might be like. Marcus followed the group at a discreet distance, maintaining security while trying to remain inconspicuous. The auburn-haired woman had moved to examine a particular painting, a portrait of Queen Isabella, who had ruled during the kingdom's golden age of exploration and trade. She stood before the artwork for several minutes, her expression thoughtful, as if trying to understand not just what she was seeing, but what it represented. Queen Isabella commissioned the first comprehensive mapping of our coastal regions, Catherine was explaining to the group. Her reign saw unprecedented expansion of trade relationships with neighboring kingdoms, establishing the economic foundations that still support our prosperity today. The woman made another note in her journal, but Marcus noticed she was also listening to conversations around her. A family from the eastern provinces was discussing the royal family's recent charitable initiatives, while a couple from across the southern border debated the historical accuracy of the palace's restoration work. She seemed to absorb information from multiple sources simultaneously, building a more complete picture than any single tour guide could provide. In the music room, tourists gathered around an ancient piano that had once been played by visiting composers and royal family members. The acoustics were remarkable. Catherine demonstrated by humming a simple melody that seemed to float and expand in the carefully designed space. Children giggled with delight while adults marveled at the room's sonic properties. Marcus positioned himself near the doorway, where he could monitor both the tour group and the corridor beyond. Palace security required constant awareness of multiple variables: the location and behavior of all visitors, the positions of other guards, potential escape routes, and communication channels with Central Command. Training had made these assessments automatic, allowing him to maintain vigilance while appearing relaxed and approachable. The woman with the auburn hair had found a spot near one of the tall windows, where natural light illuminated her notebook as she wrote. Marcus wondered what captured her attention so thoroughly. Most tourists focused on obvious attractions, expensive furnishings, famous artwork, rooms where historical events had occurred. This woman seemed equally interested in structural details, architectural choices, and the relationships between different spaces within the palace complex. As the tour moved toward the library, Catherine explained that the room contained over 30,000 volumes, including manuscripts dating back to the kingdom's earliest years. The current royal family maintained the collection as both a private resource and a repository of national cultural heritage. Scholars could apply for research access, though most books remained off-limits to casual visitors. The library's ceiling soared 2 stories high, with balconies providing access to upper shelves. Leather-bound volumes filled custom-built cases that stretched from floor to ceiling, while reading alcoves offered quiet spaces for study. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across reading tables that had been used by generations of royals and their guests. Marcus noticed the auburn-haired woman had stopped writing in her journal. Instead, she stood perfectly still in the center of the room, her eyes closed, as if trying to absorb something beyond what could be seen or photographed. When she opened her eyes, there was something different in her expression, a sadness or longing that hadn't been there before. The tour group was beginning to show signs of fatigue. Children who had been excited at the beginning now complained about sore feet and asked when they could sit down. Elderly visitors moved more slowly, grateful for the benches placed strategically throughout the public areas. Even the most enthusiastic tourists seemed overwhelmed by the constant stream of historical information and architectural details. But The woman with the auburn hair appeared energized rather than tired. She had moved to examine a display case containing illuminated manuscripts, her face close to the glass as she studied the intricate calligraphy and miniature paintings. Marcus found himself wondering about her background. Was she an art student, a historian, or simply someone with unusually intense curiosity about royal culture? Catherine was explaining the manuscript's significance when a commotion erupted from the corridor outside the library. Voices rose in excitement, followed by the sound of rapid footsteps on marble floors. Marcus immediately activated his radio, checking for updates from other security personnel while positioning himself between the tour group and the doorway. "All units, this is Central Command," came the voice through his earpiece. "Princess Elena has returned early from her morning ride. She's entering the main palace now, approximately 2 minutes from the public tour area. Standard protocols in effect." Marcus acknowledged the transmission while gesturing subtly to Catherine, who understood the signal and began steering the tour group away from the corridor. When royals moved through the palace, tourist areas were temporarily cleared to ensure privacy and security. The procedure was routine, but it required careful coordination to avoid creating panic or disappointment among visitors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Catherine announced cheerfully, "we're going to take a short break in the garden gallery while palace staff conduct some routine maintenance in our next scheduled area. This will give you a wonderful opportunity to enjoy some refreshments and perhaps visit the gift shop." The tourists accepted this explanation readily, many of them grateful for a chance to rest and process what they had already seen. They began filing toward the garden gallery, chattering about their favorite rooms and debating which souvenirs to purchase. Marcus remained in position until the last tourist had left the library, then prepared to escort any stragglers to the designated waiting area. That's when he realized the woman with the auburn hair was no longer with the group. He scanned the library quickly but thoroughly, checking behind bookcases and in reading alcoves where someone might have lingered to examine a particular display. The room appeared empty, yet she couldn't have left through the main exit without passing directly in front of him. Palace security protocols required accounting for every visitor at all times, especially during royal movements through public areas. Marcus activated his radio again. "Security Post 7 to Central Command. One tourist unaccounted for from library tour group. Adult female, auburn hair, traveling clothes, carrying camera and notebook. Beginning immediate search of adjacent areas. Acknowledged, Post 7. All units be advised. Missing tourist in library sector. Maintain standard protocols, but exercise additional vigilance." As Marcus began systematically checking possible hiding places, he heard something unexpected, the soft sound of someone crying. It seemed to come from behind the rare books section, where a small alcove contained historical documents too fragile for general display. Moving cautiously, Marcus found the missing woman seated on a window ledge, her face buried in her hands. She wasn't hiding deliberately. She was genuinely upset about something, seemingly unaware that the tour group had departed without her. "Miss," Marcus spoke gently, not wanting to startle her. "The tour has moved to another area. Are you all right?" She looked up, and Marcus saw that her green eyes were wet with tears. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, she wiped her face with the back of her hand and stood up, obviously embarrassed at being discovered in such a state. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble. This place brings back memories." Marcus studied her face more carefully. There was something familiar about her features, though he couldn't place where he might have seen her before. Her accent was local, not foreign like most tourists, and her emotional reaction to the palace seemed far too personal for a casual visitor. "Have you been here before?" Marcus asked, though palace records would show any repeat visitors during his 15-year tenure. She hesitated before answering, as if weighing how much truth to reveal. "A long time ago, when I was very young. Things were different then." Before Marcus could ask what she meant, his radio crackled again. "All units, Princess Elena has cleared the public areas. Resume normal tour operations." The woman heard the transmission and seemed to understand its significance. "I should rejoin my tour group," she said, gathering her camera and journal. "Thank you for checking on me. I hope I haven't caused any problems." As she moved toward the door, Marcus found himself reluctant to let her leave without learning more about her story. Something about her presence in the palace felt unfinished, as if this meeting was part of a larger puzzle he couldn't yet solve. "Miss," he called after her, "I don't think I caught your name." She paused in the doorway, looking back at him with an expression that seemed both sad and hopeful. "Emma," she said simply. "My name is Emma." Then, she was gone, hurrying to catch up with the tour group while Marcus stood alone in the library, wondering why that name seemed to echo in his memory like a half-forgotten song.